Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, the show where every episode I talk to writers and editors, agents, sometimes others from the publishing industry, to learn a little bit about them and the work that they do, and of course about the industry itself. I am your host, Rich Eisen. No, not the guy on the NFL Network. I feel like lately I've had to say that a lot because I had a conversation with somebody who, knee deep into the conversation, I realized he was talking to Rich Eisen of the NFL Network. So not him, but if you're looking for people who want to talk about writing and publishing, now you're at the right place. Not football. Anyway, my show is available on YouTube and, of course, as a podcast via all of the major podcast platforms. I understand Google Pods is going away, but Apple is still out there, Amazon, all the others. I am on all the big ones, so you should be able to find it pretty easily. Same name, the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words. So on to the show. My guest today came to me via a recommendation from another writer and a friend of the show, AJ Devlin. He's been on the show before. We were talking at this year's Left Coast Crime Conference in March, and he said, I have a friend that's got a new book out, and I really think you ought to know about it. I said, okay, great. He goes, and I even brought you a signed copy because if you know anything about AJ, he's the greatest book promoter in the world, both for himself and apparently for others too. Anyway, I know he's a great writer, and so I said, of course, I would check it out. Any recommendation from you, I'll gladly follow up on. I am so glad I did because that book, Call of the Void by J.T. Siemens, is one of the best crime novels I have read in years. I'm going to hold it up here for the folks that are on the YouTube show. Call of the Void. This is really, seriously, one of the best crime novels I have read this year for sure, maybe in years in general. Highly recommend it. It is compelling at every turn. It's very gripping. It's fast-paced without being rushed. Just true edge of your seat entertainment. So I'm really glad to have him here today to talk about that book and his other work and all things writing. So JT, welcome to the Open Mic. How are you doing today?
Thanks very much, Rich. Thanks for having me on. It's an honor.
Absolutely. And since I always get it wrong, it's a given, like the sun coming up in the east, I get names wrong. Did I pronounce your last name correctly, or is it Sun?
I believe Siemens. Yeah.
Siemens. Okay. So
you got it right. You nailed it.
This is a first. I never ever get names right. So I'm very excited about that. So anyway, let's start with the book. I'm gonna hold it up one more time for the folks that are on YouTube. I'm gonna hold this up so you can see it here. Call of the Void, J.T. Siemens. I understand this is the second book in the series, but let's start with this one. We'll get to the first one. Tell us all about this book.
Okay, so Call of the Void. It's second book in the Sloan Donovan mystery series. Sloan Donovan's my protagonist. She's a bipolar ex-cop turned PI. She's relatively new to the PI game, but not new to law enforcement. She is still suffering some pretty serious PTSD from what happened in the first book. She took quite a beating, both physically and psychologically, and she's only 6 months has passed by, and she's in need of a break, but she doesn't really get one. She's approached by a mother of a missing teen, and it was part of a case that Sloan was loosely involved with 6 or 7 years prior when she was still a cop. And it's sort of a last-ditch attempt on the part of the mother to help find her lost daughter. And Sloan's partner is reluctant to take on the case, thinks it's a loser of a case. Sloan can't say no to it, and ends up entrenched and embroiled in this case that goes far, far deeper than just a simple missing persons case.
Yeah, it was a great peeling back of the onion. With each layer there was something new there, and really, really masterful work. I want to say that because mental health is such a touchy issue for a lot of people, and it's interesting. The last a handful of guests I've had on have protagonists who are dealing in some way or another with some form of mental health issue. So in a way, and my daughter's a mental health care specialist, so I mean, I'm kind of gratified to see that, we're starting to bring this out maybe a little bit more into the open and into our world of books. But how did you come to having a protagonist who is dealing with bipolar disorder?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So the character of Sloan Donovan, she came to be, she's a composite of about 3 or 4 women that I've known, that I've worked with as a personal trainer. For many years, I worked at a country club in affluent West Vancouver here. And shortly before I started work on the first novel, there was a murder that occurred at my workplace. And it was an after hours thing. I didn't witness it, but one of my colleagues did. And she witnessed the aftermath, rather, not the murder itself. And she was coming to work one day and she came across the body. And very strong, very, very tough, able-bodied woman, could kick most guys' asses kind of thing. And I watched as she became unhinged in the weeks that followed. And I got to know her a little bit, and it really, really, really did a number on her. And I wrote a short story based on that. It was my first short story based from a female perspective. I didn't use her specifically, and I fictionalized a lot of the story, but the character of Sloan sort of came alive. And then the more I got to know the actual woman and some other women in my workplace too, they'd read the story and it resonated well. And they said, it sounds like your protagonist I've got bipolar. It sounds like you've got a pretty good handle on this. And at that point, I didn't diagnose my character. I didn't know enough about it. But that gave me the confidence, I guess, to explore that a little bit deeper in terms of medications and without try to psychoanalyze too much. I just found it fascinating. The more I learned about that particular disorder, I saw it as an asset to a protagonist possibly solving a case, in that it leads to tends to lead to an obsessive quality. And I found that these individuals that I knew, they were masterful at getting shit done. They did a tremendous amount. They seemed to have almost, I don't want to say superhuman capacity to work and to do and excel at athleticism and things like that. But they were able to make use of their so-called disorders, and it seemed to be in a very positive and powerful way. And I thought that's an interesting thing to explore within a character. Now, when I was developing Sloan's character, you have to have a pretty clean bill of health psychologically to become a police officer. So she sort of duped to get on the force in the first place. She duped the tests and learned to bypass the polygraph and things like that. Kept her mental health a secret until she couldn't anymore. And that's one of the reasons why she is no longer a police officer. But that's sort of the long and short of how that came to be.
I was interested in that several aspects of this because, first I'm just curious. Did you have to do a lot of medical research on this, or did you kind of try to keep it to a minimal aspect?
Well, you do the research online and you read about medications and things like that. But then when I actually started to get anecdotal information from people who live with that condition, I was given so much information that I couldn't have gleaned from any amount of internet research. And I also, without passing my early manuscripts off to people, I took chunks of them and I said, like in terms of backstory, do you feel like I'm getting this right? Am I portraying this in an authentic light? And in all cases, I got thumbs up, or I got ideas of how to tweak it a little bit better and make it a little bit more authentic to do justice to the character and to what she suffers from.
Well, one of the things that I found that was the most interesting is that, yes, this character has what a lot of people would consider to be a very debilitating mental health disorder, but it doesn't overtake the story. It's part of the story. It's part of her And as you say, you found a way to actually incorporate it into how she goes about things without it ever becoming preachy or, thou shalt know more about bipolar disorder or whatever. It was just a part of her, of what makes her who she is. And then, it's something she has to deal with as she's trying to go about her work. So, was it difficult for you to find that balance, though? Did you find yourself, as you're going through rewrites, going, okay, I've made a little too much here on this, or, maybe I should actually note that a little more here? I mean, how was that balance for you to strike?
I guess fairly organically. I've never been to a psychologist myself or a psychiatrist, but I wouldn't diagnose myself in that way, but I definitely have some obsessive traits. And writing's one of them. So I know what it's like to kind of develop an obsession. And it's not that hard for me to sort of tap into that energy a little bit, especially when I write a first draft. I write a first draft, pedal to the metal. Usually takes me a couple of months, and it's just nonstop to see what comes forth. And I become very obsessed during that phase. It's not like I write around the clock or anything like that, but I get it, and I get obsessed about other. I have to be very careful what I take on in life, in terms of pursuits, because those obsessive tendencies kick in within me. So it's not a stretch for me to tap into that for a character.
Yeah, I can relate to that to some extent. I really love gritty crime fiction, and this definitely fits the mold. And for me, it was reminiscent, and I mean this in the most, I don't ever really make comparisons, but I mean this in the most positive way. It reminded me a little bit of Jordan Harper and a few other writers like that I like, in terms of that real gritty storytelling. That for all of the grittiness of it, it won't let you go, right? It's got that. There's something about it that I read a lot of books, and I have to read a lot of books at a single time. So I'm going back and forth. What's my mood today? Oh, I got this show coming up. I got to make sure I finish this. There are books that I cannot put down, and they find some time in my reading schedule, no matter whatever else I got to do. And yours was one of them. So tell me a little bit about what it was like for you when you started shopping this, because that's not every agent's cup of tea or a publisher's cup of tea. How long was it for you from this concept to publication of the first book in this series?
The first book took me a long time to find a publisher. I suppose because the first book might even be grittier than the second in some aspects. I did a lot of hands-on research for the first book, and there were some things that I saw when I was doing. I actually witnessed when I was doing that research, especially in Vancouver's downtown east side, that made it into the novel. And I couldn't have made. There's certain aspects I couldn't have made up, and they just had to go in. And some of the scenes they were hard. Some of the aspects were a hard sell. So the first book went through innumerable rejections and years. And I got feedback, and I was very stubborn. I wasn't willing to compromise about certain things in terms of softening those gritty elements. Didn't have any interest in doing that. And I had all but given up on the first book. It would be 2019. And I'm like, this book isn't going to sell. It's not going to go anywhere. I need to start. And it's just, I was getting depressed isn't the right word, but I was getting frustrated. And I go, I need to work on something completely. Well, it's the same character. Because I believe I had a great character, but there's something about this story that's just not working. And so I need a fresh slate. Started planning Call of the Void. Had a different title then. And it was just such a breath of fresh air to be working on something different after being mired down by the same novel, trying to get that first book and published for so long. It was really inspiring. So I remember those first few months of writing that. It just sort of came together, the multiple storylines, plot lines, and then it wasn't. It was maybe a year after that I just got a bite on the first novel. So I hadn't finished the second novel yet, Call of the Void, And then things started to happen. It was meeting AJ was fortuitous for me because he made a few. At that point, I was ready to take some suggestions from people. One was the title of the first novel. He made a suggestion to make it. It used to be called "Better the Devil You Know," and then he suggested I call it "To Those Who Killed Me." And I got rid of a troublesome, violent prologue, and that was basically it. That was the tweaks I had to make in order to make things happen. And then the first one got a publishing deal, and then a couple of years later, the second one did as well. So it's been a long road in that regard. I thought for a while that I had a really strong feeling for the second novel. I think this is probably going to be my first novel, and then I was ready to almost scrap the earlier book, but that turned out not to be the case.
You know, it's such a quandary for all writers, I think, to know what feedback to take and what feedback to ignore. And, you know, regular listeners to this show know that, you know, I've talked about writers I know who took so much feedback, they were essentially, they had to start all over again anyway, because their book was no longer their book. It was essentially, they changed it so much to make their writers group happy or something that they'd lost all the focus on that book. And they and it always worked out better when they did. So, you know, it really does beg the question, what's better, my vision or someone else's vision? Well, of course, it's always your vision, but sometimes a little help shaping your vision a little bit to market realities or whatever is helpful. You noted AJ. I talked about AJ. I mean, AJ is a force of nature. I think, if he ever gives up this writing thing, he's got a career in sales of some kind, because he can definitely, convince people of things. But
100%.
Maybe expound on that moment a little bit when you said, okay, I'm ready to give up a little bit of this because I can see that actually the payoff might be worth it now. You know, was that an aha moment or was it a slow thing? How did that work?
It was an aha moment. It also helped that I really respected AJ's judgment and I liked his writing. I think it's important looking back on all that to, you find people to critique your work, especially early on. Who are their favorite authors? What kind of books do they read? Stylistically and things like that. So I trusted his judgment. And now even now, I've got other friends who write different genres who, we don't really, our works are so vastly different and what we like to read is so I don't necessarily trust everyone's judgment with regards to what constitutes a good book or a good story, because taste just varies so much. So you kind of have to, it's without getting into an echo chamber, you have to surround yourself with authors who share similar sort of taste in what constitutes an excellent novel.
Right.
Yeah.
It is very subjective. All art, all creative endeavors are subjective.
Yeah.
There are people who love The Wizard of Oz and people who hate The Wizard of Oz, right? It's just fill in the blank of what it is, right? So it is hard when you're not having success to not want to figure out every way you can. And so I have mad respect for people who can hold on to that vision when they're not having success, because it's very easy to say, well, I'm probably doing it wrong. But like Sylvester Stallone with Rocky, or again, there's probably 1,000 examples where you just, no, I'm going to do it this way. So I really respect it, and especially I think when you're writing something that's even within mysteries, kind of gritty, noirish. There's a smaller audience for that than there is for mysteries in general, right? Or God cozies or something, where it seems like it's just become so huge. So it does take some real backbone to hold on and say, hey, nah, man, I'm going to do this. This is going.
Yeah.
Along those lines, you've talked a little bit about developing the Sloan Donovan character. Tell me a little bit more about that, because she's a really interesting character. Because I find a lot of men who write women tend to write a female character just like they would a man, except she's a woman. And in this case, I didn't feel that at all. I mean, yes, she's very tough. She's very physically tough, as well as, obviously mentally tough. But, she's still got very human characteristics that I don't know. She's still, it never came across to me like, oh, this is just, a dude that he wrote as a woman. So maybe expound a little bit on how you developed her. I know you talk a little bit about her being an amalgamation of some other people, but as you get into it and you start to develop what this character is really like, what kind of process did you have thinking about all that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. When I first wrote that short story, and I don't even know where the name, I mean, I like the name Sloan. I'm not sure where I pulled that from. And I wrote this short story, and Sloan's voice for whatever reason just came to me almost ready-made. I hadn't done much of a character arc on her, or I hadn't delved deep into her character at that point. She wasn't even in this short story. She wasn't even an ex-cop at that point, but the voice was there. And I think I'm a bit of a sponge when it comes to people. And like I said, I was surrounded by a bunch of women who were very strong, very dynamic, very funny, unusual, driven. And we'd work together, but we'd also, some of those people at that point, there's a lot of hard partying going on too. And so we get to hang around and hang around with each other. And so, yeah, I really do think she's an amalgamation. Her voice and her character came quite easy to me, and her vulnerabilities too. It's all there, and her character is like a bit of a gift. And I developed her backstory a little bit, obviously a lot more, in terms of her history. But from the very start, I had a really strong sense of who Sloan was. And of course, in any protagonist, there's a lot of the author makes its way in there too. And I especially see that now that I go back and I read the books. There's a fair bit of me in there. I was also conscious, when I wrote the first draft of the first novel, and I go, I don't want anybody to talk me out of doing this. And writing from a first person female perspective, I just wanted to see if I could pull it off. And so I didn't have a lot of input early on in that, but I had a sense that I was hitting some of the right notes regardless. And I'm glad I did, because my previous stories had been, male driven, kind of guys like myself. It'd be like if I took myself and crossed it with Harry Bosch or something like that, very macho type characters. And I wasn't interested in doing that. That wasn't very interesting to me. And so I really wanted it. It's more of an experiment to start with, and I'll see if I can pull this off. And if I fall on my face, well, so be it. I'm gonna follow my gut. And that's pretty much what I did.
All right. Well, you hit it out of the park. I'll just say that. Was there ever a time as you were working on all this where you thought, I'm gonna quit. It's too much. This is not what I wanted, or whatever? Is there ever a time where you just almost bagged it?
Yeah, well, I almost bagged the first novel, although it was as good as I could. I thought it was as good as I could make it. It was never a question of stopping writing, though. It was like I was just going to be writings. To me, it's in me. I write almost daily. It's something I need to do. If I don't, I get quite miserable. So quitting writing is not an option. And I think that I've got this sort of perverse tenaciousness in me that I'm always going to continue to push through until something happens. I don't. There's really no quit me in that regard. I can get discouraged, but again, you talk about Sylvester Stallone. He's one of my idols, and I really, those are the people I really admire, and I sort of study their work ethic, and what I make up for in sort of innate talent. I think what I lack in innate talent, I make up for in in sheer work ethic and tenacity and just pushing forward. And I really embraced the day-to-day grind. Like my favorite part of this whole journey is not necessarily going to a book launch or to an event or whatever, or getting some applause and that's all very nice. It's that I love the day-to-day grind of sitting down and seeing what's coming next, whether it's first draft or the.
I will say you are unique in that front. So many writers are just like, oh, they see the blank page and they just start to, sweat blood.
Yeah. So embrace the fear.
Yeah. No, that's good, man. I'm glad to hear that because it makes your life a lot easier when you embrace that blank page and go to fill up. I always, I have another writer friend who always says, it's the one time in your life you have total control over the world you're creating. You can make it do anything. You need to embrace it. You need to look at it that way as like, I have total control of this, right? No one's telling me what to do. I can do it. And it's like, okay, that's actually a really good way of looking at it.
Yeah. Even on the worst day of writing, 99% of what you put down the page might be garbage, but there's that one little something, one sentence or something like that wouldn't have gotten put down if you hadn't made the attempt,
Yeah. You find a nugget.
Yeah.
So Vancouver is such a deservedly notable city. And as you know, you worked at a country club for a long time. But this story really delves into the, into the seamier side of the city, the darker side of the city, which every city has. Every city has a poor side of town. I know, I grew up in one. I'm 100% aware of what it's like, that it doesn't matter where it's at. Tell me a little bit about that, though, in terms of, choosing the seamier side of this very internationally known city as your setting, right? To not go to those country club settings and to do it instead, amongst the rabble and the darker streets.
Yeah. Well, I've always, ever since I was a kid, I've been drawn to. I don't live in those darker streets by looking over beautiful Stanley Park right now, but I'm drawn to them, and I always have been. To different cities, Skid Row areas. I've gone places I had no business going, just to explore and just see what's there, and Vancouver's downtown east side isn't very big geographically, but it's really stands out in it sort of represents old Vancouver, old decrepit, rotting Vancouver, maybe 10 square blocks of just fentanyl hell, juxtaposed against, rising new skyscrapers literally butting up right against it. So it's this illicit and diseased pocket that doesn't seem, it's almost like a rotten tooth that needs to be excised. But I find myself strangely drawn to those areas. And I've not so much anymore, but when I was writing the first novel, I went through a bit of a Bukowski phase, and I was exploring some of those bars. I spent a lot of time in some of those Skid Row bars and talking to people and just kind of getting to know the lay of the land. And I witnessed a lot down there. And there's a sense of community down there that is unlike any other part of the city. And there's a darkness and a danger, but there's also a sense of community and an openness too amongst the people that have lived there their whole lives. And Vancouver's downtown east side isn't as dangerous as some of the other ones. It doesn't have although the weapons are creeping in. So there's definitely, since COVID, there's been a lot more street level violence. But it's just the perfect setting for some of the scenes that I create.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like I say, it was a character unto itself in some ways, and I always think a lot of times and all good fiction setting is something of its own character, and I thought you did a really good job with that because. Again, you think of Vancouver, you think of all the high-end restaurants and the hotels and all the new Vancouver. So it was interesting to be more set in the these grittier parts and with folks who weren't living that lifestyle, right? Yeah. So that was a very different thing. I guess along those lines, what draws you to crime fiction then? It just sounds like there's something about that whole thing that is a real draw, but that wouldn't necessarily translate to what you want to write about. Sometimes you might want to write about something else and just keep that as a separate thing in your life. What is it about the writing of crime fiction that's so appealing to you?
I guess one thing that pops to mind right away is I feel a tremendous sense of injustice when I spend any amount of time looking at local news and things that are going on and crimes being committed that seem to have no satisfactory resolution. And especially with the events of Call of the Void, for instance, missing young women. I see these posters around town, and that's actually one of the catalysts of how that particular novel came to be. Is I was in the downtown East Side, and I saw a tattered remains of a poster of a missing First Nations woman, and I looked her up. I looked up the name, and I led to the missing children's database, and I saw hundreds and hundreds of missing, not just women, but young boys and young men as well, across the country. And in the U.S., it's even far larger. And that was it disturbed me. And I found myself thinking about that more and more, like what happens to all these missing. I mean, we don't want to think about that too much. I think we know the answer in most cases, but I thought this is something that would bother Sloan Donovan quite a bit as well, to try to get to the bottom of that. And so when I choose to write about a subject, it's something that almost gets under my skin. I'm like, am I willing to devote a year of my life to writing about this? Is it something I care enough about? And that topic certainly is. And as well as the events of my first novel and the third one that I'm currently wrapping up. Crime fiction as opposed to other types of fiction. I've just been reading it for so long, and it's what grabs hold of me and it doesn't let go. I try reading more literary fiction. It could take me 6 months to read a certain Pulitzer Prize winning novels. Well, not 6 months, but far too long. As opposed to a book that just grabs me and it doesn't let go, and it's still amazingly written. I went through a little phase where I was reading Tana French recently. I'm like, she's almost on the level of a Pulitzer Prize winning author, but she's writing crime fiction.
Yeah.
So, and I've never particularly been drawn to it as a kid. I read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy, but that's a genre that just doesn't really do it for me anymore. I wish in some ways that my interest in books was a little bit more diverse than just, I read probably 95% crime fiction now. And that's just where my mind goes. That's where my soul resides. So, and there's just so much good crime fiction out there.
I can relate on so many of these levels. And of course, my wife has asked me, because like I said, I grew up poor and, very, very, very poor and dealt with lived in those neighborhoods and dealt with a lot of these people. And she's like, I'm really surprised you want to read about that. I'm like, well, I can't explain it either, because I would not want to go back and live in it again. Would never want to be in those places again and deal with some of those issues and those people. But yeah, there's something about reading about it. It's 90% of my books. There's a few other authors and occasionally I'll read softer stuff, but it doesn't hold my interest. As I say, I couldn't put this book down. It's just like, oh yeah, I think to some extent for me, I've often recognized characters I feel who remind me of people I knew, people I grew up around. And then my brother became a cop, so I've heard every story known to man about, the awful things that humans do to other humans, right? Yeah. So much of what I read feels like it resonates with me a little bit. And so I wonder sometimes too, even if you didn't necessarily grow up in that stuff, there's something in all of us that like crime fiction. There's something in those characters and in those stories that touches something inside of us that we couldn't explain really, if we really tried to, then it would be just really difficult to do that. So
Right.
late, I totally relate.
Yeah.
So I think every writer, and maybe you more than some, because I understand you have a little bit of interest and experience in screenwriting. Every writer thinks of their book or wants to, envisions their book as being a major movie or a TV series. And, sometimes we're fortunate enough to get optioned. And every once in a while, I've a few folks on the show who come on the show who've had their books turned into movies or TV series, and that's fabulous. Do you have, when you write, do you have visions of these characters in your head that match with, actors we'd know or whatever? And do you have somebody in your mind that you would make the perfect Sloan Donovan?
I do. I do. And so my foundation in writing, I mean, I wrote dozens and dozens of screenplays before I even wrote a short story or anything. So I think I think and write cinematically. That's just a natural progression. Movies and film have been as important to me as books. To answer your question, Jessica Chastain jumps out as Sloan Donovan.
Who is from here, from my town.
Oh, is that right? Wow.
Yeah, not where I'm living now, where I lived most of my
right.
We're about 12 miles to the west now, but yeah, she grew up the southern part of Sacramento, and I lived in Sacramento for many, many, many years. So.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, yes, she was a student at the theater. I did some side work for a million years ago when I was kind of betwixt jobs and needed some money. So I did a little side work for a theater, just doing some writing stuff for them. And yeah, she was one of our student actors at that time. Anyway, not to interfere with all that.
Yeah, no, she's definitely got the level of intensity that I think she could easily pull off Sloan's character.
Yeah. I can see it. Yeah. I'm so glad you didn't say like Angelina Jolie or somebody like that's so trite now. But I think Jessica Chastain would.
Yeah. I remember watching Zero Dark 30, and I think she's Sloan in my mind.
Yeah. I'm the motherfucker that found Bin Laden.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Yeah. I have loved all of her movies I've ever seen her in. She's if you've ever seen oh God, now what's the poker movie. It'll come to me. It's God, it's a woman's name. Da-da-da's game. Anyway.
I know the film you're talking about.
It'll come to me. Highly, I recommend all her movies, but that one was particularly good too. Last serious question here, which is, the industry is always changing. God, it seems like overnight sometimes. What's the biggest lesson maybe that you feel like you've learned in your past so far? And maybe what would you share with somebody? Somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, JT, I've got this book in me. I want to do this." Any words of advice?
Get that book written. Get that sense of completion. There's something about even finishing a first draft. And again, going back to Sylvester Stallone, I think he wrote Rocky in 6 days or something like that. Now a screenplay is totally different. You can churn out a screenplay, in a week. Pretty tough to do that with a novel. Although I've heard people write novels in a month. Now that's extreme. I would say to anybody who's said they got a book in them, they really want to write, cultivate a daily discipline, whether it's an hour a day or 2 hours a day or a word focus. When I'm in a first draft mode, I no matter what, it's 1,000 words a day. And I just move that story forward. That's my process. It works well, and it gives me a sense like of now, again, there's a lot of editing and a lot of drafts that have to come after that, but there's something to be said for finishing that manuscript. And there's a sense of completion and accomplishment, and it's that builds self-esteem. If you're messing around, rewriting the same 1,000 words of the same chapter for 6 months, it's just the enthusiasm is going to dwindle. So you just got to keep forging ahead and not. And another thing is let go of perfectionism. you know. I don't even worry about. So if I write 1,000 words today, I'll go back tomorrow and I'll do a quick review. I'll read through, but I won't change anything. I won't start, you know, I'll see all the blunders there. I'm like, fix that later. And then I just keep moving forward with it. And again, just building the story and then and then shaping and sculpting it later.
Yeah. You know, we talk a lot in this life about falling down a rabbit hole, but my experience is we build most of those holes ourselves, and then we jump in with both feet. And you literally have to. I'm so with you, because I'm like most people. I tend to try to edit something as I go or whatever, and I've learned to stop doing that. Just get to the end, because you can't edit what you haven't finished.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm with you. That's great advice. I think that's really good advice for anybody. Well, my closing question, I always try to have fun with this, and I hope you have fun with it, because I mean to. Yeah, I've taken to having a theme with these options I'm going to give you. So you'll probably figure out the theme pretty quickly, but I do try to have a theme for these options. So let's say I'm someone who has the power to put you in a room with one of the following three people for whatever, conversations, dinner, drinks, trip down to the local dive bar, whatever the case may be. Who would you choose and why? And the options I'm going to give you are, yes, there is a theme. You can tell me if you spot the theme. The options I'm going to give you are Jack LaLanne, Jen Selter, or Arnold Schwarzenegger. One of those three I could push you together with for conversation. Who would you choose and why?
Oh, it's Arnold Schwarzenegger, hands down. Hands down. He's another huge idol of mine. You know, fitness is another side of my life that's extremely important to me. And when I was a young lad, I mean, Arnold and Sylvester Stallone were it. I didn't have a lot of positive role models, male influences. So those guys, people might roll their eyes at this, but Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone were my surrogate father figures. So absolutely. And I still respect the hell out of those guys.
This might be one of the only times since I've ever been doing this where I gave you an option of somebody that I actually had interactions with or had, because he was governor of California. I'm a political reporter, so I covered him for the 6 years he was governor, 6.5 years he was governor. And we actually just had him back in town, I don't know, about 6 months ago for a luncheon event. And he was a keynote speaker at an event I put together, back in 2010. I wrote my thesis on the recall. So my master's thesis on the recall. So yes, Arnold has been a kind of unintentionally big part of my professional life for sure. He's an interesting cat. I will tell you this. He is one of the most interesting cats I've ever known. The more of his story you know, too, the more, whatever you think about his politics, whatever you think about anything else in his life, some of his personal choices and things he's done, hard not to have respect for the ethic, the drive, the self-confidence, the stick-to-itiveness, the novel, or the title, I should say, of his new book, Be Useful.
Yes.
Everything with him was like, it's action, get in the middle of it.
100%.
So good choice. I'll just tell you, that's a good choice. If you ever get a chance to actually chat with Arnold, you'll see what I mean. I think he's the real deal, I believe. Yeah. He again, didn't come from much, and he got himself into, I have a real quick story. We were I had him one time when I was president of our press club here. We had him we always have the governor as our keynote speaker in our January event. And he made some reference to when he was the most physically developed man in the world. And somebody kind of next to me laughed. And I remember looking at that person thinking, did he say something funny? Because he was the most physically developed man in the world.
Yeah.
He didn't win all those Mr. Universe and Mr. Everything's for nothing. I mean, why do you laugh? That's not funny at all. He's being honest.
Yeah.
So, but I found that even that could be self-deprecating with him. He's got a really good sense of humor. So,
for sure. Yeah.
Anyway, this didn't Sorry, I didn't mean to make this the Rich Eisen Remembers show.
No. That's great. Great.
Anyway, JT Siemens, thanks so much for coming on the show. I'm going to hold the book up one more time here for those on YouTube. Call of the Void. Great cover too, by the way. I really, really like that cover. It's subtle. You have to look at it a little closely to see everything that's in the frame. And so I'm drawn to covers.
Phenomenal designer named Michelle Verana, and I'm proud to say I had a little bit of input into the cover choices as well. So,
well, it's a great cover. I'm going to say it one more time. I'm going to hold it up one more time. Great stuff. Really, truly one of my favorite books of the year so far. Really, really like that. I owe AJ a drink the next time I'm around him. Say thanks for the heads up on this because it was really good. JT, thank you for coming on the show, sharing all your insights into how you do what you do. I look forward to going back and reading the first book and then getting in the queue for the third book because I love following a character that I really have an affinity for. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. It's been a pleasure.
Well, I will say the same thing I say to everybody all the time. It's if you haven't hit subscribe, please do so. I am going to let everybody know right now. I'm going to take a little hiatus. JT's going to be my last guest for a few months. My tech guy's going off on a long sojourn, and I'm going to support him by not doing anything with this while he's gone. We'll be back sometime, probably around September, early October, with more guests, more insights, hopefully into writing. Until then, you can still hit subscribe. You can still leave me a good review. I've got well over 100 of these interviews on my show that you can go through. Some great writers, Lou Berney, Eric Pruitt, Wanda Morris, Craig Johnson, Jim Latoile, Kelly Garrett. I mean, there's a lot of really, really great folks. If you're trying to learn something about writing in this industry, I like to think this is a good place to do it, and it doesn't cost you anything. I don't do advertising here. I'm not trying to make a buck on this. I make no money doing this. I do it because I love it. It's one of the few things I get to do in my life where I don't have to think about money. I just do this thing, so it's kind of fun. And mad kudos to all those people, to JT, everyone who shares their time with me and with you. I really appreciate that. So we'll be back in a few months. Until then, I'm going to leave you the same thing I always leave you with. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us. So please, whatever you do, make today count. For my guest, JT Siemens, for myself, Rich Eisen, this has been the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words. See you in a few months. Take care.